suspended in the air for 24 hours. His vital signs have plummeted to the limit. At this moment, the rescue team is only a few meters away from him, but the damn knot has firmly wedged him in midair. Severe frostbite and hypothermia have left him powerless, and with hope seemingly within reach. Can he still be saved? This is a true story that unfolded on the northern wall of the Eiger, the most tragic ascent on this deadly precipice to date. In the eve of the 1936 Berlin Olympics, the local government, in a gesture of Olympic tribute, called on climbers from around the world to conquer the northern wall of the Eiger. As a reward, the first successful summit would be honored as equivalent to an Olympic champion. In no time, numerous skilled climbers were eager to attempt the challenge, including the two highly skilled German brothers, Andi Hinterstoisser and Toni Kurz. Although not very old, the brothers had gained some fame in the climbing community. After a 700-kilometer-long trek, they arrived at the base of the Eiger just before the competition. By now, the base of the mountain was crowded with experts, and countless news reporters had set up cameras, ready to capture this sacred moment. While the altitude of the Eiger is only 3,967 meters, its wall ranks among the top 5 most difficult climbs in the world. Considering the steep terrain, the brothers had made thorough preparations well in advance, spending over 10 days to finalize their route. They also placed supplies and equipment along the route to ensure everything was foolproof. Subsequently, the two decided to set out on a clear night. Initially, everything went smoothly. Years of tacit cooperation allowed them to navigate most unexpected situations even in the darkness. However, as daylight emerged, other team members gradually caught up, and troubles began to unfold one after another. On this day, while Toni Kurz was placing pitons, he accidentally dislodged a rock. Andi Hinterstoisser, upon hearing the shout, managed to dodge it, but unfortunately, the Austrian team member, Henry Arau, was struck by the falling rock. Seeing his teammate's serious injury, Eddie Rayner advised him to descend for treatment. However, the Austrian climbing team was sponsored by the military, and without achieving the honor, Henry Arau couldn't face going back down. As a result, the two of them had no choice but to persevere. As they continued ascending, new problems arose. When they reached an altitude of 2,800 meters, Toni Kurz and Andi Hinterstoisser discovered that they had entered a dead end on an almost vertical rock face. There were no handholds, and their pitons were insufficient if used every meter. In a daring move, Andi Hinterstoisser came up with a bold solution: to traverse to the other side of the mountain and open up a new route. This was an extremely risky maneuver, a pendulum swing at an altitude of 3,000 meters, where any slight mistake could result in a fatal fall. Fortunately, Andi Hinterstoisser was highly skilled in this technique. After a few attempts, he quickly found new handholds. Once the rope was secured, Toni Kurz climbed over. To compensate for the earlier mistake, they allowed the Austrian team member to join them. The four temporarily formed an alliance. However, at this point, the two brothers disagreed over retrieving the rope. Toni Kurz wanted to leave the rope behind in case it was needed for a retreat, but Andi Hinterstoisser, confident in reaching the summit, insisted on reclaiming the rope. Little did they know, this seemingly simple decision would sow the seeds of disaster for what lay ahead. After retrieving the rope, the group continued their ascent, reaching the second ice wall at an altitude of 3,100 meters by 8 p.m. According to the plan, they were supposed to rest for the night on this narrow cliff less than 2 meters wide. If everything went as expected, they should be able to reach the summit the next day. However, early the next morning, they were awakened by the cold wind. Surrounded by thick fog, Toni Kurz immediately realized that this might be a precursor to an approaching snowstorm. Unable to afford any more rest, they had to continue their journey towards the summit. As they climbed, Andi Hinterstoisser discovered a backpack buried in the snow. Excited, he thought it was supplies left by previous climbers and called Toni Kurz to help dig it out. However, as they dug, their expressions suddenly became solemn. It wasn't supplies at all but the body of a mountaineer. Apparently, someone had attempted to conquer the mountain before them but had tragically failed. At this point, two members of the Austrian climbing team caught up with them. After understanding the situation, they unanimously decided to bury the pioneer's body in the abyss. With heavy hearts, the group continued their ascent. Soon, the four reached an altitude of 3,350 meters. Compared to the second ice wall, the terrain here was steeper. To ensure their safety, they decided to tie their ropes together. However, it was this very knot that led to an unexpected turn of events. The day before, Henry Arau, who had been hit by a falling rock and suffered a head injury, showed signs of confusion. In the middle of the climb, he missed his grip and fell down. Eddie Rayner, following him, was knocked off the cliff by the impact. Meanwhile, Henry's leg got wedged into a crevice in the rocks during his fall. Because it was connected to Eddie Rayner's rope, Henry Arau's leg suffered a share of pain with each step Eddie Rayner took up the rope. But Eddie Rayner climbed up the rope and his leg was snapped raw. Now, The prospect of all four summoning together seemed impossible. Andy Hinterstoicer and Tony Kurz faced two choices: leave the Austrian climbing team behind and continue to the summit, or assist them in a collective retreat and seek support. Andy Hinterstoicer preferred the former, as they were only a few hundred meters away from the summit, and reaching it would bring endless glory. However, Tony Kurz believed that the lives of their teammates were more important than the ephemeral achievement of reaching the summit. After a heated argument, they ultimately decided to retreat together. Descending is not as straightforward as ascending, especially on a nearly vertical mountain face. The descent presented a formidable challenge. Despite their slow and cautious progress, an unexpected snowstorm made each step particularly nerve-wracking. Throughout an entire day, they descended only a few dozen meters, with darkness gradually falling. They were forced to camp at an altitude of 3,170 meters. At this point, all their supplies were depleted, and the four were on the brink of exhaustion. However, the weather showed no signs of improvement. The next day, they laboriously descended to the point where they had traversed earlier. Due to Andy Hinterstoicer's earlier decision to retrieve the ropes, there were no climbing ropes left at this location. Andy Hinterstoicer attempted to traverse again, but the opposite rock wall was now covered in ice. Exhausted, he couldn't grab hold even after several attempts. Going back the same way was now impossible. In a desperate bid to survive, the only option left was to descend vertically. It's often said that going up is easy, but coming down is difficult. Today, they truly grasped the meaning of this saying. Battling the biting cold wind, the three decided to lower the injured member first. However, before the injured climber could reach the platform, an unexpected avalanche swept in. In an instant, Andy Hinterstoicer, unable to evade the avalanche, was swept away, and another Austrian team member, due to the immense force of his descent, crashed into the rock wall and died on the spot. When Andy Hinterstoicer regained consciousness, he found himself suspended below the rope, driven by a strong will to survive. He climbed upward, passing the lifeless Austrian climber without time for sorrow. He continued ascending. However, a more perilous situation unfolded. The last piton at the top began showing signs of loosening. Despite Tony Kurz's constant urging and attempts to secure the loosening piton, Andy Hinterstoicer knew in his heart that this small piece of equipment couldn't bear the weight of all four climbers. In a desperate attempt to give his best friend a chance, he made the agonizing decision to use his knife, cutting the rope and burying himself and the two Austrian teammates in the endless abyss. Suddenly, the once four-member team was reduced to only Tony Kurz. He took out his bivouac bag, intending to wait for rescue on the spot. In the midst of panic, however, the bag slipped along with the backpack, plummeting down. It was a complete disaster. Just as Tony Kurz felt despair setting in, sounds of a rescue team reached him from a distance. It turned out that reporters at the mountain base had noticed the danger the climbers were facing. They arranged for a rescue team to climb up and search for them. Upon hearing Tony Kurz's cries for help, the rescue team quickly identified his location, but the snowstorm was too severe. They attempted several times but couldn't get close. Eventually, reluctantly, they had to leave amid Tony Kurz's desperate calls. That night, Tony Kurz was overcome with grief. Alone on the cliff, he huddled throughout the night. Fortunately, the weather began to improve the next day. Early in the morning, the rescue team set out again. When they saw this man, who had been exposed to the wind and snow for a night and was still alive, everyone was shocked. They devised a rescue plan, but it required Tony Kurz to descend to their designated position. The issue was that the rope on Tony Kurz was not long enough, so they instructed him to unravel the rope from his body, divide it into 4 smaller strands, and then reassemble it, creating a longer rope. This is a common survival technique among climbers. However, for the weakened Tony Kurz, this operation was not an easy task. He nearly exhausted all his strength for this maneuver. As the rope dangled down, the rescue team hastily secured him. Yet, a new problem arose. They miscalculated the height. When they released the rope, they discovered that the end was still several meters from the ground. Fetching the rope again was evidently too late. Tony Kurz above had already prepared his descent device. He began sliding down slowly. When he was just a few meters from the ground, the carabiner got stuck in the knot. The rope reached its end. The last hope was for him to untie the knot, allowing his body to drop to the ground. This probably would have saved him. However, Tony Kurz was now at the brink of exhaustion. With superhuman determination, he had surpassed one seemingly impossible limit after another. This time, he simply had no strength left even to lift his hand. Gazing at his beloved and the snow-covered mountain before him, he exhaled his last breath, and everything came to a sudden halt. Tony Kurz's death became one of the most tragic scenes in the history of North Wall climbing. But this is not the end. It is the starting point for humanity's continuous challenges. Today, the North Wall of the Eiger remains cold, but the beautiful qualities of human nature striving, struggling, bravery, And more continue to burn like wildfire in the hearts of generations of climbers. I am a movie enthusiast. See you next time.